Is this paddle really worth $280? Is it really as good as people are saying it is? Stay tuned to find out. In this review, I'm going to be focusing on the Magnus 14 and 16 millimeter paddles from Joola. The Magnus Gen 3 is the brand new signature paddle of pickleball superstar Tyson McGuffin. It has bright pink accents, and unlike previous Joola Gen 2 paddles, which were a bit of a letdown last year, these Gen 3 paddles live up to the hype. In the past, I used the Gearbox Pro Power and Selkirk Power Air, both very popular paddles, which I will be comparing the Magnus to throughout this video. Just a quick disclaimer, there are some quality control issues with these new paddles. I have been using this paddle for about a month now, and I haven't personally experienced any issues, but I know some areas of concern have been core crushing, loose edge guards, and inconsistencies with the grip texture. I do love this paddle, and I will address some of these issues briefly in this video. I just want to be fully transparent as these paddles are very expensive. The Magnus is a new shape which draws inspiration from Tyson's previous paddle model, the Selkirk Invicta shape. This new signature paddle for Tyson is a similar shape to the Selkirk Labs 002 and Selkirk Power Air. However, they aren't the exact same since there's no hole in the middle of like the Selkirk paddles. The Magnus is a 16.5 inch long paddle, which qualifies it as an elongated paddle. The main difference between Tyson's previous Selkirk paddles and the Magnus is that the Magnus has a 5-inch handle versus a 5.25 inch handle. However, when I put these side to side, I did not notice this. It might just be the way that the companies are measuring these handles, but as I put these side to side, they look the exact same. The Magnus is offered in a 14mm and a 16mm option. The surface material is a raw carbon fiber face. The static weight range is between 7.9 and 8.1 ounces. The swing weight for the Magnus 14mm is 114 and the 16mm is 120. The twist weight for the Magnus 14 is 6.1 and for the 16mm it's 6.36. One note of caution is that the 16mm option of the Magnus, as well as other Joola Gen 3 16mm models, is that they appear to have a thicker handle than advertised. So if you have a smaller hands or prefer a thinner handle like myself, maybe look at the 14mm instead. I recently took off the stock grip and put on my preferred lizard grip. When doing so, I noticed there was some extra padding underneath the stock grip, and the handle now has a much more standard octagon feel versus a more rounded feel with it left as stock. The power in these paddles is insane. Last year, the big jump in technology was thermoformed paddles. This year, so far, we have the Gearbox Pro Powers and the Joola Gen 3s, which both have new core technologies. The Joola Gen 3's new core creates more of a tennis racket effect where the ball loads more on the paddle with a higher dwell time. The best example I have heard people using to explain this effect is thinking of it like a diving board. The more you push down on the diving board, the more it bends and throws back that energy in the opposite direction. So the harder you can swing with maintaining the ball in the face, the more power the paddle is going to generate. This new tech is like what we saw with the Gearbox Pro Power earlier this year, but Joola claims it's not the same as Gearbox's floating core. Instead, Joola added a layer of white foam that sits inside of the edge foam around the honeycomb core, from the top of the paddle all the way down the edges. This new core design is what they are calling their new propulsion core. Another comparison to the Gearbox is that these paddles also appear to have a break-in period, meaning the paddle will get slightly hotter and more broken in the more you play with it, hence a break-in period. I noticed this about 5 days after heavy play with my Joola Gen 3 Magnus. The second best feature of these paddles behind power is spin. These paddles are crazy. In my spin test with the Magnus, I was averaging around 2280 RPMs. One thing to note, however, is there does seem to be some quality control issues with the roughness of the faces. I've seen some Magnuses where people have literally been able to stick them to their shirts and the paddle just stays there. I was recently at my local tennis and pickleball store and felt multiple paddle surfaces for fun, and there was a noticeable difference between some paddles. I have also been hearing that there are some inconsistencies in the individual paddle faces between each side, meaning one side of the paddle may get 1800 RPMs while you flip it over and the other side gets like 2200 RPMs. Hopefully this is just an issue with early production runs, but Joola is known for having some quality control issues, so please just be aware. The control on these paddles is way better than the Gearbox Pro Power. As I mentioned in the power section, the amount of power is really dictated by how hard you swing. The slower you swing, the less dwell time, which leads to less power. This makes drops significantly easier than what I experienced with on my Gearbox Pro Power. Even after 1 month of using the Gearbox, I still never felt as confident in my drops, but I can confidently say with my Magnus, it only took about 1 week to really dial it in. Another issue I had with the Gearbox were returns and blocks flying out more than I liked. It was a lot harder to control on a big serve or a drive that was hit back towards me, but I haven't felt that way nearly as much with the Magnus. All in all, it does not really make sense the touch you can get with these paddles. Joola has somehow found a way to deliver a paddle with big power, but great feel and touch. These new Joolas have really improved over their predecessors. The Magnus has the biggest sweet spot when compared to the Perseus and Hyperion, the Scorpius having the largest sweet spot of the group. The sweet spot is so much larger on the Magnus versus my Gearbox Pro Power, which just makes sense. The Magnus is so much easier to use. On my Gearbox, I had to add lead tape to help improve the feel and size of the sweet spot, but the new Magnus feels great stock. Now you can add some lead tape to improve it even more, but that will affect the swing weight, which personally I wanted to stay away from at this current time. Joola has a new warranty system where you can register your paddle through the Joola Connect app via an NFC chip in the handle. A very cool and clever integration I really like about these new paddles. This was also added to ensure consumers purchase an authentic paddle, as I have heard around my local courts, you can buy a knockoff Gen 2 Joola Hyperion off Alibaba. So props to Joola for finding a clever way to give consumers peace of mind that they are buying an authentic paddle, as these paddles are not cheap. I am also assuming this will make warranties simpler and more streamlined, but time will tell on that one. Another note of caution is several of my friends who have been playing with the new Gen 3 Joolas have started to have a rattling issue in their paddles. This is caused by glue coming loose in the edge guard. This problem is not unique just to Joola, but it is unfortunate to see this for such an expensive paddle, especially when it's been occurring so quickly for some of my friends. Should you buy the 14 or 16 millimeter? These paddles were very unique in this category. This is the first paddle where I would say the 14 is easier to control than the 16 millimeter. The main reason being is less dwell time. The 16 feels great, but actually has more power in my experience than the 14. I still have been gaming the 16 millimeter more than my 14 millimeter. However, I could see that changing at some point in the future. The 14 millimeter seems more familiar to other paddles in terms of the feedback, while still providing the benefits of this new technology. I just think the 14 millimeter may be an easier transition for most rec players, while the 16 millimeter is a much bigger jump. The 16 millimeter does have more upside if you can dial it in and use it effectively. These paddles are made for higher end players. However, I think these paddles are going to sell extremely well for all levels, and all players can benefit from this new technology, but I truly feel to unlock the max potential of these paddles is going to be done by 4 or 5 plus players. The Magnus is great if you predominantly play singles or if you are used to the elongated shape. Also, if you prefer a shorter handle or don't utilize a two-handed backhand as often, this paddle will feel great for you. If you have ever used a Selkirk Invicta shape or the Power Air, you will feel right at home and have a much more powerful and forgiving paddle. Absolutely yes. This actually feels unique and provides an edge in power and spin over most of the current paddles on the market. If you are a 4 or 5 plus player, you will see all of the benefits this paddle can give you. However, if you are a lower rating, I don't think this paddle will necessarily fit your game, but if you are a rec player who enjoys playing with power and spin, I'd say go for it and give it a try. Just be careful with errant shots. I hope I could provide some help in your buying decision. I would appreciate it if you would hit the like button or leave some feedback. And if you have or will buy this paddle, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.